So now I'd like to introduce today's panel moderator, Laurie Mackenzie. She's going to bring the panel up on stage and they'll introduce themselves. Laurie is an incredible leader and strategist. She is the executive director of the Clayman Institute, and as such, she works with companies to create inclusive workplaces. She has over 20 years of experience in business and marketing, and she is a wonderful change agent herself. So Laurie, there you are. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Looking for my inner warrior to have this conversation after that, so thank you so much for being here. I've been fortunate enough to be at all of the WT2s. Now the VM Women's Leadership Lab has been a partner with this conversation for 3 years. Now we're going to talk about inclusion in action. What does that mean? I want to take a minute and think about what does the word inclusion mean. When I first heard it, I started to think, I think inclusion is a state when each and every person's value is felt and seen in our organization. But as I've done this work, I've started to think, is that a passive definition? That my voice is just valued? What would an active definition of inclusion be? What if the definition of inclusion was that the power of each and every person was unleashed to greatly expand what's possible in our organization? That indeed, you know that phrase, the total is bigger than the sum of its parts. That's the definition of inclusion that I'm interested in. Now, inclusion is a great ideal, but why isn't it happening? Why are we having that conversation in 2018 when we can practically make cars drive by themselves? There's a conversation that prevents us from examining what there is to do. The idea that we already have achieved a meritocracy. That we already have created a state where each and every person is evaluated for exactly what they contribute and bring to our organizations. So if we believe we've already achieved a meritocracy, then we aren't examining what we could do to try to improve. So today our panel is going to look at inclusion in action. What's the active definition of this? How can we examine what's maybe not working in our meritocracies to get better? And lastly, we're going to talk about culture. So culture, inclusion is a global priority. I haven't met a single company that doesn't say we want to be more inclusive. It's a global priority, but it's an individual accountability. We experience culture in our one-on-one relationships with our managers, on our teams. So how we're treated every day is how we know what our culture really is. So what can we do as individuals, as leaders, as managers to deliver on a culture that unleashes all of our potential in an active way to make our culture, our organizations, and our work more remarkable than it was when we joined our organizations. So I have the pleasure of introducing our panel. What I'm going to do is bring them up. I'm going to introduce them just before I ask them each their first question, so you'll remember who they are just before they answer their questions. So panelists, please come on up. Do you care what we said? No. Welcome. To my left is Connie Guillermo. She's the editor-in-chief of CNET News, and she's responsible for overseeing the global news team. Covered tech, covered the world, and from your view, tell us, here we want to achieve inclusion in action. Why? What are the barriers? Why haven't we achieved it so far? What's going on?
Sure. So as a journalist who's covered Silicon Valley for 20 years plus, I would say that the biggest challenge that we have as a community of women and minorities trying to get their voices heard is that we've bought into this notion that Silicon Valley has a women in tech problem or it has a diversity problem. And actually what we need to do is take control of the storyline and the narrative. And what I tell my reporters every day when we write these stories is that it's not a women in tech problem, it's not a diversity problem, it's a management problem. If you were to go and tell leaders at companies across Silicon Valley and startups that if they painted the walls of their offices orange and they would see a 20% bump in sales and profit, what would we do? We'd be surrounded by tangerine walls, right? But you tell them that Mackenzie says, and Lehman Brothers and all these studies say that diverse teams are more productive and profitable, and somehow they don't believe it. So, snaps, right? So take control of the narrative, and don't, when someone says there's a diversity problem or an inclusion problem, no, it's 2018. We have a management problem. If people don't understand how to run companies in 2018 that can yield the best results for employees, for shareholders, for investors, for whoever, for customers, then they should not be in that management role. And if they don't understand that diversity and inclusion is an asset, just like orange walls are, then the management needs to change or get new training at the very least.
Thank you.
Sure. Uber.
Anyway. Also on our panel is Michelle Ainger. I'm going to skip over. Michelle Ainger is Senior Director at Exponential Talent, a boutique firm working on diversity and inclusion. Before her role there, Michelle was the Chief Diversity Officer at Intuit, eBay, and she worked at Deloitte as well. Now, Michelle, you work across companies. You see what's going on more broadly in the industry. Can you tell us, what's exciting? What are you most excited about in trends happening in diversity and inclusion today?
Yeah, well, first of all, it's a very exciting time to be involved in diversity and inclusion today. I mean, you don't go through a day without this being in the news, right? And so it's a pretty compelling reason for companies to be engaged. So I know a lot of you here are working for companies that are leading in the space, early adopters in the space, but what we're starting to see is the laggers, if you will, are also joining the conversation in the space from an organizational perspective and not just from individual change agents in the company. And you can kind of tell that they're a little bit more of the laggers in the company because they'll self-identify by saying, we're kind of late to this game, but we're starting to get this, and we really are serious about engaging it. So I would say that that's actually an encouraging sign that we've even got some late-stage players that are really very much entering the conversation. And I think that's allowing us, for those of you who have been at this for a while, I'll say the phrase business case, and you'll probably try to groan, right? Because there's been a lot of conversation about the business case, and typically in the past, it's been something that's been thrown up as a roadblock, prove it to me, prove that there's a business case here. And I think at this point, we're at this juncture where that's not the case anymore, and the engagement around the business case really is about, the war for talent, particularly in the technology space, that all of our companies are seeing. And it's a much more positive kind of, approach to the business case in terms of, diversity of thought. Help me understand how diversity of thought will really drive innovation. And so instead of it being something that you throw up to say, we don't really want to do this, it becomes a compelling case to advance the agenda for diversity and inclusion. And I would say the final thing is, for companies who are really looking to continue to stay at the cutting edge with, everyone kind of joining the conversation at this point, what I'm seeing at one of my clients recently, what they did for the first time in 30 years, they changed their values in the last 2 years to explicitly value inclusion and diversity. And some of you may already be working at companies that have done that, but really taking that seriously, embedding it into the culture, making sure that it is a management issue, but it's also for everyone to engage in that conversation. And that allows you to align your processes, how you evaluate people, behaviors, mindsets. It really, unites the company behind this. So those are some of the things that I'm seeing.
Oh, great. And just a poll for the audience, how many of you think that your company values also include something aspirational around diversity and inclusion? Awesome. And how many are going to take action when we leave here and ensure that your companies, right? So there's something we can all do. It's a great idea. Thank you, Michelle. Also joining us is Erin Yang. Erin Yang is the Vice President of Platform Technology, Product and Strategy at Workday. So she's in the business. She's responsible for leading Workday's cloud platform strategies, sales, and product management team. And that team at this time is about parity, 50-50 women and men. Erin, tell us a little bit about how that has shaped your experience at work.
Yeah, I will say that it was almost odd to start with because I was an electrical engineer in college. I was, one of 10 of about 70 in my graduating class, female. And so I had gotten really used to just being one of the guys, and you don't even realize what you're doing, but all your small talk is around sports. You don't bring up, you cover some of the more female aspects of yourself. And that was what I noticed the most in the workplace environment, was I could sort of relax and actually bring out other aspects of myself. You know, small things like, oh, I can wear a skirt or a dress and still feel like I'm being taken seriously. Some of the small talk was about Stitch Fix and are you using it and do you like it, and recommending products like that. And you're like, this feels weird but awesome because you're able to bring that full authentic self to the workplace. The nice thing was, you know, with Workday, it was always one of our values, employees first, and I think that brought that, you know, it's 49% of our entire product management team actually across the company that is female. And it happened, I would say, pretty naturally because of the value of, you know, people and the diversity that they bring and the positive value of those differences. But we are doing some more programming of late. So there's a LEAP mentorship program that we have that targets women, matching mentors with a small group of mentees. More recently, we actually reach out to veterans because they have some non-traditional backgrounds, and trying to get them into the workplace can be challenging. So we have a program that brings them in for an internship and have an 83% conversion rate now into the workforce. So programs like that have also been, you know, targeting other types of diverse groups, which is great.
Thank you. I'm hearing a theme. It's built into the values of your organization. It allows her to not cover, to be her full self at work. So your productivity, your engagement, your innovation is so much higher.
Yep.
And then you're taking one small win with women and expanding to see how you can do better to ensure that you fully capture the value of what society has to offer.
Exactly.
Thank you. And joining us to my far left, I suppose your far right, is Bas Gaillard, the Chief Information Officer at VMware and Dell. Yep. You lead VM's Global Information and Technology Organization, a group that manages critical technology systems supporting the company's worldwide business. So you drive innovation at VMware and Dell, and you're on a panel on inclusion and action. So you must see a link between the two. Would you tell us from your perspective why it's so important to drive inclusion for innovation?
So we always say, think out of the box. Right? To do innovation, you have to think out of the box. If you're in the box, how are you going to think out of the box? It's just as basic as that for me. I think diversity leads to creativity. You look around the corners. It's a lot more progressive, and people get inspiration by diverse ideas. You know, Beatles got inspiration by going to a magical mystery tour to India. To get Eastern. So you get a lot more inspiration when people are unlike you. And that's pretty much the heart of innovation, right? So I think, you know, people ask this question, but I'm surprised that you can get to the four rooms of the same people from the same kind of workplace and same kind of life experience and create this out-of-the-world products that also has to fit all the folks, right? So if you look at our user base, one of the persons who works for me from Dell, Janine, is here somewhere. I'm not going to single her out. She's the largest user of VMware and Dell technologies. She uses it internally. Well, if you want to make products for her, you better have a staff of R&D and IT and other people who can think of what her needs are. So I think it's pretty obvious. The other thing is I agree with your point of I like to come to work exactly like how I'm at home. I like to be here. I want every day to be like Saturday morning, right? Where I come in. And you know, I want it to be like that for everybody. So when you're relaxed in that kind of mind frame, you know, well, how nice would it be if I can come to work and it's Saturday morning and you can be yourself. You don't have to, you know, you can be authentic. Sorry, Betsy, don't worry. I'm going to dress up somewhat decently, not like how I dress up on I know she's getting worried now. But you know, women should come into work with that kind of a mindset to be authentic, and so should people of color and orientation and ideas and viewpoints. So that's why it's important for us. And the other good thing about VMware is if you ask me to code everything that VMware does, our values, and I don't know. I mean, they send out a lot of information, and I have two companies now. There's Dell and VMware. I would not be able to code everything we're doing, right? But managers kind of lead it. So if you do our operations review, we embrace the spirit of what inclusion is, I believe. Our operations review, we look at the numbers, we talk about innovation, we talk about our other values, like doing good in society and so on. So it has to be a part of your operating system, your strategic planning, et cetera, I would believe.
Absolutely, it can't be something someone does on the side.
Right.
So I'm taking away two things: release our inner warriors, and come to work every day like it's Saturday morning.
That's right.
Okay. Now, we're not going to say this is easy. If it were easy, it'd be done. So first I want to start our conversation talking about what are the barriers? Why haven't we gotten farther than we are today? Connie, with your view as a journalist, what can you say?
Yeah, I would say, again, as a journalist watching this industry and writing a lot of stories about this topic, in the 1910s and 20s, Hollywood was dominated by women. The most famous woman director in early Hollywood was a woman named Lois Weber. How many people have ever heard of Lois Weber? I mean, 1, 2? She was more famous than Cecil B. DeMille, and today we don't know who she is. Why? Oh, and the top screenwriter was another woman, Frances Marion. They were good friends, actually, and they made a lot of movies together. In the 30s, Wall Street decided that Hollywood was a money-making business. And so the Wall Street financiers came in and put in a lot of men at the top of those companies, and slowly, all of those creative women who were directors and screenwriters went away. Because power, money, influence, those all went to a lot of the men in the industry. And in Silicon Valley, when I started, it was more diverse than it is today, I think. Steve Jobs and his Mac team, there were a lot of women on that team. Linguists and designers, he just wanted talent. He didn't care what the packaging was for that talent. So it's recognizing that there is a power play here, and that if you're treating these roles at companies as a boondoggle for your friends, we talk about the board of directors of companies being a big problem, not a lot of women on the board of directors. And I wrote a column at CNET where I volunteered as tribute. I would quit my job tomorrow. I just needed 3 gigs as a director on companies' boards, because I can go to 4 meetings a year, one of them in Hawaii, I'm sure. I'm happy to take the stock options. If you can't figure out how to get women on the board, I can get you a list of women who will take that boondoggle tomorrow. And that's not, and that is not to trivialize being on a board of directors. You need to have some skill sets, but I would argue that there are plenty of people who can provide insight and innovation. So it's recognizing that there's this power dynamic at play, right? And that we have to recognize that it's not about, are you qualified? Are you good enough? Do you have a STEM degree? I can count how many leaders at tech companies do not have STEM degrees, and somehow they rise to the top. And it's holding companies accountable for that in a very polite and ladylike way, as Ruth Bader Ginsburg would say. If you saw that documentary, right? Be a lady, but that doesn't mean be quiet. It just means be smart, right? So it's pointing out these problems and holding people accountable. And I would say in the last 2 years, my biggest moment of optimism was when Brian Krzanich at Intel, I was sitting next to him at dinner at CES a couple years ago, the night before he announced his big diversity initiative. He's married to a woman who's an engineer. He has 2 daughters who want to study STEM, and they told him they might not want to go work at Intel because they would not rise to the top there based on the dynamics of the management hierarchy. And so what did he do? He tied management and compensation bonuses to diversity goals. So he put money behind the problem, and guess what? Tiny bits of movement. So it's recognizing that there's a problem, that it's about power, money, and influence. It's not about a lack of women with STEM degrees or a lack of women with whatever. When Twitter went public, I did an examination of the board. All I did was look at their S1, and I wrote a story. I was at Forbes at the time, and I said, what does it take to be on the Twitter board? You have to have a rocket science degree from MIT. And they had MBAs, French lit major, journalism major. Hello, I can be on a board. And, Mike Moritz at Sequoia, former journalist, history major, right? So it's recognizing that people are saying this, but they're doing something else, and then holding them accountable to that.
Great. Key takeaway.
End of
Act
rant.
like a journalist and do your investigation, because the narrative might not match what's going on, and you might be able to create some action by understanding what's really going on.
Right, and if you're surrounded by orange walls, you want to find a new job.
Michelle, also, do you have some thoughts about barriers to really achieving our aims of inclusion?
Yeah, I would say that. So I have a master's in public policy, which wouldn't necessarily lead you to a career in diversity and inclusion in the technology field, right? But I would say that one of the things that I learned in public policy school was there was this thing called the eightfold path that one of the professors had invented, and the number one was understand the problem that you are solving. And I would say in the diversity and inclusion field right now, we have a lot of solutions, a lot of actions, a lot of programs, a lot of initiatives that are floating around there. But if you don't understand what it is, if you haven't diagnosed the problem that you're solving and use the power of data. I mean, we talk about data all the time in the technology industry, big data, right, and analytics. And if we're not using that on behalf of our diversity and inclusion efforts, we're underutilizing what we have to help us diagnose those problems and then apply the right solutions and interventions to make a change and make a difference. And so some things that I've seen be really powerful is intersectionality, looking at the data not just through a gender lens and then a race and ethnicity lens separately, but uniting the two and really understanding that within the broad spectrum of gender, there can be very different experiences, whether that be by level or by organization, but also in terms of intersecting identities. The other thing that I think is really exciting is that I'm starting to hear people talk about ONA, organizational networking analysis, in the diversity and inclusion field. And so this has been around for a while, applying internal analytics and looking at where are the influencers in organizations. We're also starting to see that applied in terms of diversity and inclusion networks. You know, so to the topic today, inclusion in action. How are people being included in the networks, and can you map that, and can you, in mapping that, understand how you can make a difference on behalf of the people in your organization? So,
great. Now let's do a little data collection here. How many of us have seen a gender breakdown of your workforce or your group at work? So I'd say 40%. Don't hold me accountable to the math, and the calculation's kind of instantaneous here. How many have seen the number of women of color in your organization? You can count that. So talking about intersectionality, men of color, LGBTQ, veterans. Okay, so another action we can all take is demand the data. You can't make informed decisions if you don't know what's going on in your organizations. The more people that are asking with the good intention of driving better outcomes for your organization, the more people that ask, possibly the better transparency we'll have, and then the more accountability. Okay. This is not a women's issue, as you said. This is an issue, really, of driving inclusion for our organizations. But sometimes, doesn't it feel like the burden's on us, that we're the ones at these conferences trying to do it? So sometimes we talk about this conversation from the perspective of allies. How do we get everyone involved in these efforts? But it's bigger than that. How do we unleash the talent and engage each and every person in our organization in driving inclusion, driving the value of our organizations from unleashing the potential of each and every person? So Basque, I'm going to turn to you. What are your thoughts on engaging everyone in this conversation, really and authentically, moving beyond those kind of nice conversations we often have about it?
I think sometimes when you single out a certain gender or certain kind of non-represented minority, you kind of exclude other people. You just have to be aware of that, right? Sometimes we don't call the elephant in the room, right? So elephant in the room is there are not too many African Americans here. I mean, I can see that. But when I say things like that, people get shocked. But if you don't even say that, you're not going to solve it, right? I mean, so in our staff meetings, in all hands meeting, I've said that, and people said, there's not enough underrepresented minorities. I don't see too many Latinas and Latinos. So, I think first you have to call the elephant in the room, because if you don't say you're an alcoholic, you're never going to get over it, right? So that's the first one. Is it's okay. It's not a taboo. It's just the situation. So you need to start something else about it. The other thing I think is there are fabulous companies who are looking for ideas, and there is a real war on talent. I always tell the people I mentor, please go join them. Your company doesn't deserve you. So I think the companies have to change. It's not women don't have to change, the minorities don't have to change. The companies have to change. And if the company's not changing, well, just leave them. My generational is you join a company, you stay with them till you die. That's long gone. There are, the life is too short, and if your company doesn't value, your management doesn't value, and they just make these, mission statement, vision statement, and the leaders don't behave, please come join us, or join somebody else who does even better than us.
Thank you. And given the war on talent, there's plenty of people who want to take us. We don't always want to move, so there's also the idea of how do you use that conversation to drive the change so we can create the organizations we want. So there is going to be an opportunity to ask questions, so I'm going to turn to Aaron next, but are there microphones for us to use? If there aren't, if you wouldn't mind coming to the front if you have a question, and we'll make sure I repeat it. Aaron, if you wouldn't mind answering next. What can we do to really engage everyone in our organizations to drive change?
Yeah, I mean, I'm really passionate about that topic because I feel like men can be such great allies in this question on gender diversity. And in that LEAP mentorship group that we were chatting about, one of my mentees brought up, well, I feel like so educated and I have all this information about the dynamics between men and women, but the men I work with still have no idea. So how do we engage them in that conversation? And I've seen it happen two ways. I've seen from the top down in an organization, they emphasize to leadership the importance of sponsoring people different from themselves. And I've personally had a positive relationship in having a male sponsor who is able to then put me forward for opportunities that really help me rise in the organization. And so I think that is super important. And I've also seen, just 2 weeks ago, I joined one of my team's staff meetings, and one of the male hiring managers, he leads the engineering team for that group, he had just gone to the Tech Superwoman conference, and he was just sharing how amazing it was to just be a minority at a conference. That had never happened for him. Like, he's like, this must be the feeling that the women at work have every single day when they come to work. And like him sharing that with the team, which was, more male than female, it was very powerful. I could see that people could really react to that. And so I think the more we can encourage men to come to events like these and come to events where they can be the minority in the room and understand a little bit what it's like to be the minority in the room, I think that can really make them ambassadors for the cause.
I want to pitch in one other thing here too. When I joined CNET 4 years ago, I was asked to co-lead the women's group at CNET. It was called iWomen. I'm from New York, so of course I don't like when people tell me things like that, because I'm like, well, is there an iMen's group? Because I want to join that one, because I'm sure that's got more power and there's more influence there. And they were like, no, of course there's no iMen's group. So I'm like, then why do we have an iWomen's group? What are we supposed to talk about? Like how we're disenfranchised and we don't have power? We already know that. Let's right? Anyway. So we changed the name of the group at my prodding to This Is Now, which is a tagline from Edward R. Murrow, who was a famous CBS journalist. I work at CBS. And he had a broadcast from the top of the rooftops in London during the Blitz called This Is London. And it was just about what was happening in that moment. So we called our group This Is Now, which is about where you are in your life. Your now is different than the person next to you. Maybe you're married, maybe you're single, maybe you have little children, maybe you have no children, maybe you're grown up. Right? Maybe you have some other experience. So everyone's now is different, and that applies to men and women. And so we should have events that talk about issues for everyone, and everyone's going to bring a different perspective to it. Not how do you cope with business travel when you have a family? That is not a woman's issue unless you're a single working mom and you don't have anybody else to help you, right? So again, it's about changing the narrative and what the context is, and even looking at things like iWomen groups and changing the name, because it implies that somehow women need a special hand-holding or extra effort. We totally do. We just don't want to advertise it, right? We want to be in a position of power, and we want to have the information that we need, but so do the peers who sit alongside us who are of a different gender, or maybe not a gender, because it's 2018. So just recognizing things like that are very important, and I'm happy to say that This Is Now has become the mentorship program also at CBS, and we do all sorts of events that men and women attend, including how to take your LinkedIn profile photo, which apparently is a big deal, but everybody wants to know how to have a good profile photo. And it was the most widely attended event, and there were lots of men and lots of women. And by the way, take the photo from above, shooting down, because if you shoot straight on, your cheeks are going to look really wide.
It's just the angle, just the angle. Okay, so I would love to hear, does anyone in the audience have a question they'd like to ask? If you wouldn't mind standing up, I will repeat your question. I see one right in the back. Right. Oh, for you, yes. Oh, there's the mic right behind you.
Oh, thank you. I guess I'd like to express that. I have a little bit of touchiness around talking about the business case, right, with like having women in the workplace. I'm a student at Stanford, and I'm also part of the Society of Latinx Engineers. And so a lot of the times when we're bringing tech companies to talk to us, it's easy to feel like you have to defend why they should be recruiting you, right, for your identities. And I think also, even within the fabric of Stanford, trying to find your community amongst all engineers, right, and all undergrads. So I was hoping you could talk about how to encourage that and how to facilitate that conversation between women to women, regardless of our identity. Because I do think it's important for us to be each other's allies and champions. So if you could talk about that from the top level all the way down, that'd be great.
Let me try this. I'm not sure if I could answer you. First of all, it's a shame that we all say we are looking for engineers, and you went to Stanford. I didn't go to a good school. I'm an engineer, but I couldn't have gotten into Stanford. So that it's kind of a jarring. But I've heard this. My daughter went to Berkeley, engineer, and oh, great, 3 people, and Betsy. So. But as an engineer, she was coming out, and her classmates were not all getting jobs. So I keep saying things like, women in tech engineering, we need this, and people are dying to find them. It's like 30 miles away, and we couldn't place. So there's something screwed up there, and I don't know what it is. So we say something, we don't have enough engineers, we need STEM, we need to educate more, but there are people graduating and they are not landing. I can understand if somebody says we're looking for, if there are not enough engineers, but there are cases like that. So first is, I don't know how to answer your question. In the sense you have got to a top institution, you are exactly the profile of people are looking to kind of recruit. One thing that does help generally in here is networking, right? At least in Northern Cal, but I'm sure it's true everywhere else. The geographical closeness of the different companies lends itself to better networking. So I had to learn to network. People would not believe that, but I'm a trained extrovert. I love talking to people I like. I hate talking to people I don't like. So you had to train yourself to speak to, some people that you may not necessarily, you need to have diversity, and you want to talk to people unlike you as well. That kind of perhaps could help, but I'm still stunned at your question.
Can I say 2 things? First of all, for networks, we're doing some LinkedIn profile work today. You mentioned how important it is. Would you mind sharing your name, and let's everyone connect to you and find 3 women who you don't know, connect to them, and agree to help them. Will everyone find 3 new women and agree to help them, connect to them, okay? Would you mind standing up and sharing your name? We're gonna have lots of people connecting to you, and if you don't yet have a LinkedIn profile, go to the little booth and set one up. So would you mind?
Thank you. It's not the difficulty of finding employment. It's my question was specific to the context again of having to make a business case as to why anyone should even come to recruit to you.
Yeah, great. Second thing I want to say is there's an article, a research paper written called "Puncturing the Pipeline" by Allison Wynn and Shelley Carell. We sat through 85 recruiting sessions and saw a lot of these behaviors. The good news is the end of the paper, it has recommendations. This is a wide occurrence. It is not just you. You send people to top campuses to recruit, and you wind up causing the women of color to leave. find out what's going on, puncturing the pipeline, Allison Wynn and Shelley Carell. Now, in terms of your question of mentoring and having women all along the career course reaching out to each other and blocking this demand for the business case, anyone have a comment about that? Michelle?
Yeah, well, because I raised the issue of the business case, and I would say that just to clarify that what I'm starting to see is that the business case is less these days, particularly in companies that really want to hire diverse talent, is less about we need diverse talent and much more about this is all the things that we can do. We're just going to presume that we're looking for diverse talent, and it's much more about this is what it means to our business, the community impact we can have, the social good that we can have. It's much more about the outcomes, if you will, and it's assumed, if you will, that organizations are committed to attracting and retaining and advancing diverse talent. So just to clarify what I meant about how the business case is changing. And then I would just say, to Laurie's point about what you're experiencing as being recruited, like this, you're at Stanford. This is as much of where you want to be, where you want to begin your career, and where you want to continue your career, as it is about companies coming to you. And so, if you're getting those signals that Laurie, was documented in Allison and Shelley's paper, that's probably a signal that there are a lot better places for you to begin your career at. And so, take that. You are operating from a position of power in this negotiation as well, and own that, right?
And I would just add on that last part because I was a Stanford grad as well, and so when people reach out to me on LinkedIn, I usually ignore them. But if they're Stanford and they write I think I've responded to every single person from Stanford. So just know the power of the Stanford network as well. That's something that's very strong, especially in the Bay Area.
That's not inclusion. What happens to people like
You need to be accepting all of their LinkedIn requests because you are the CIO. So that's what I have to say about that.
I want to just add, I agree with what has been said here. If someone is making you feel that way, that's not the company you want to work for. But you want to have an answer to them, right? The biggest challenge that women have, I have a daughter who's 25, and I spent her entire childhood teaching her how to get out there and fight because she was very shy and very quiet. And as I mentioned, I'm from New York, and that is not my mantra. It was horrifying to have a quiet daughter. But she is not quiet anymore. But anyway, what I would say to someone who is making you defend that role, I worked at Bloomberg as well for 7 years. This is an industry that is about money, right? Like Hollywood, tech is not a philanthropic organization. It is companies that are motivated to make money. So if someone asks you why should you be recruiting, you can just cite some of those studies, right? Mackenzie and all these say that if you have diverse leadership, you have diversity in your teams, you're going to be more profitable and engaged. The trolls on our website, whenever we write stories, always say, well, these companies are super profitable already, right? So it kind of diffuses the argument that there's a need for diversity at Apple and Facebook and all these people that are making lots of money. And as a Bloomberg and Forbes reporter, what I would say is, I've never heard, ever, an executive or a director or any manager say, you know what, we're not going to do that. We don't need more money. We're good with the money we have. So we don't need to adopt anything that's going to change our business practices that's going to yield more profit. Go back to the orange walls, right? So nobody walks away from more money. And if any manager says, no, we don't need to be diverse because we can leave that money on the table. I want to know who that person is, and I want to interview them, because that has never happened in 25 years of being a business and technology reporter in Silicon Valley. Nobody ever walks away from an opportunity to be more profitable and to be more successful, or to have their products come on time, or to have great products. So if the person who's telling you this can't see that, bye-bye Felicia, right? Whatever. So that's your line.
Right there in the middle, please. Microphone, please. Thank you. Microphone's coming here. Thank you. Please stand up. If you wouldn't mind saying your name, we'd love to know who you are.
Sure. My name is Hazel Barker. I am a VMware employee, and I actually happen to be under your organizational unit badge. So I want to say thank you for the work that you've done. Our leaders have made some changes, and me, myself, I have seen that and have experienced it. But I do know that being a woman in tech is one thing, and being a black woman in tech is something different. And what I want to know is, for organizations, what can you suggest that they do to make sure that they're opening up their doors and their tables to us? I see a lot of Black women, Latina women who are very, very talented, who don't get the opportunities that they should. So how do we make sure that organizations see us, they hear us, and they value us?
I'm going to take a commercial break. Stacey Blake Beard, would you mind standing up? Stacey Blake Beard is a professor at Simmons College. She is a professor and expert on intersectionality. Stacey, do you want to start with an answer to this important question? And then I'm going to come back to our panel.
Thank you, Laurie. So that was a great question. Thank you so much. And there's two parts to it. So first is we have to do the work to fortify ourselves and make sure that you know that you're valuable, right? So I'm knowing all of the networks of thank you, snaps over there, right? So that we have to make sure we do that work. And then there's the external piece of how is it that we get the mentors, which is where my research is, the intersectionality, which is what Melissa is going to be speaking about this afternoon, and then just, figuring out how you use your network. But staying sustainability, so making sure that you stay strong during this process that many of us face. It's not just you, but how do we change systems? I love the point of the management in that we have to figure out how do we change systems and structures to pay attention to this. Great question.
Great. Panelists?
Yeah, and I might be speaking, preaching to the choir here, but one of the things that I think is so powerful and the access is not equal is the particular relationship that is sponsorship. And so we just helped a client launch a sponsorship program. So it was the organization driving it that was focused on underrepresented minorities. And so that included women, but it also included women of color and men of color in that organization. And I say that because, one, you need that special relationship with someone who's in power, who can advocate for you, but not just advocate for you, but also have your back when you are taking that high-risk assignment and you're in the middle of it and you're going to make some mistakes. It's vitally important that you have that. So in terms of the things that are getting in the way of talented women of color advancing in the organization, that I think is a lever that is continues to be underutilized. So something to think about. Find a sponsor. Manage that relationship. To the extent that your organization has that kind of formal process in place, make sure that you're in that conversation.
One of the things I did was I did an analysis of who I'm connected to on LinkedIn. And I asked, how many Black women, how many Latinas, how many Asians? And I noticed that even I, who work in this space, had a very uninteresting LinkedIn kind of demographics. And I proactively tried to make sure if I met someone, I really did make sure they were in my network. So one of the things you can do as well, it's on all of us to make sure that we make Silicon Valley a place where everyone thrives. It's on all of us. One of the things you can do is make sure that you are truly connected to the diversity and beauty of everything that is Silicon Valley. Hourly employees, people who do food service. Are you truly connected to everyone? And as a result, perhaps you can unleash the power of your networks for good. Okay, great. Yes, sir. Final question.
Hi there, my name is Cody Wright. I'm with a company called Plumeria. We work with companies to help them nurture their employees the way that their employees nurture them. And so a big part of that is working with company values and so on and so forth. I'm going to take a cynical perspective on diversity and inclusion initiatives to see how you respond, like what your thoughts are, because I'm hearing reflections of this throughout. I believe that it's a mistake to make diversity a strategy. Whenever you make diversity a strategy, it always goes back to the things that companies care about, which are things like money, right? When you use the argument, hey, if you're more diverse, you can make more money, right? You'll connect better to your end user base. To me, that's still just using people to make money, right? I feel like diversity is the outcome, and it's an outcome that we want, right? And I don't feel like inclusion is actually the way to get that outcome. Whenever you are talking about inclusion, you're talking about that there's a circle that's already been made, that's already been drawn, and you're trying to open up part of the circle to let people in. And people may not fit in that circle. That may not be the right circle. You need to blow up that circle and build a new circle, right? I really think that a lot of this comes down to equity for people. I think that a lot of organizations, somebody mentioned earlier that it falls to us to kind of do this work, to make diverse workforces and stuff. And I think part of that is because a lot of the D&I initiatives out there, I think, give a way for companies to say, hey, we're doing something about this. We're having some nice conversations. We're having some aspirational values, whatever it is. But they don't actually do anything, right? So how do we incorporate equity into this? Meaning people put their money where their mouth is and they create a truly equal environment at their company.
Panelists?
Well, I would say that there's still a lot of work to be done on diversity and inclusion. I'm all for equity as well, but I think we still have a lot to do when it comes to diversity and inclusion. I mean, I think there's been some really great points that have been raised, like is this room, for instance, as diverse as it could and should be, right? Or do we have, everyone as a part of the conversation, if you will? And that's diversity, right? And then inclusion is about, do we have everyone as a part of the conversation? But it's much more than that. To your point about, blowing up the circle, making it larger, right? Expanding its border. Maybe it's not even supposed to be a circle. That may be the wrong metaphor. So I do think that the new terminology and the new concepts that are entering the space, like equity, like belonging, I think educational institutions are much more further along the journey in terms of talking about equity. I think in workplaces, we shouldn't not engage in that, but I do still think that we shouldn't leap over the fact that we still have a lot of work to do when it comes to diversity and inclusion.
Let me try another one. So let's take money aside. So I mentor a few millennials, and actually I learn a lot from them. I mean, they want to learn from me, but we call it reverse mentoring. Almost all millennials, and this is a stereotype, they want to work for a company that changes the world, right? Silicon Valley talks about changing the world. Changing the world is not making money, right? So that's not, so then I found out maybe I'm a millennial because I don't want to work for a company that just makes money. So I want to change the world, and I want to do it in a meaningful way, right? So I think so we spend quite a bit of time in our staff meetings talking about foundation work and pro bono IT work and how to kind of expand the circle and make the technology for good. Not because HR tells me I should do it, not because of the value statement, because I feel good about talking that. And initially people think you're crazy, and then everybody in their operations reviews, they have at least two pages talking about this, right? So I think doing good, appealing on values, is very important. And one way to even, if you want to justify it, I'm not going to justify it, we're going to just do it because it's the right thing to do. And I'm getting good talent and the results speak for itself. I don't have to have metrics. But if you want to have metrics with that, then you can kind of go back and prove it, right? If some companies want metrics, you can go, so the money and the other things is, to me, a side benefit that comes with it. But some companies do look at it. So that's one. The second is, you can't assume everybody is altruistic and they're going to, let people alone and for goodness and good things will happen. So I do believe, however restrictive it is, we do need law. We do need people who talk about this. And while hopefully in 10 years, 15 years, we don't have to have these conventions, right? We don't have to have any legal enforcement. We don't have to any reports from Workday, and everything will be perfect. And that's the world we want to build. But in the interim, we are going to sue people if you don't do the right things. We are going to measure. We're going to have metrics, and we're going to talk about it. So I would say, till people show the right behavior, till it reflects this, I would not throw out the values and stuff that we have right now.
Thank you. Let's have each of our panels leave us with one quick concluding thought. Connie?
I don't know. I'm sorry. I'll try to be quick. But since I brought up the money is to fix a problem that we've been talking about for 2 decades. That's a way to get companies who are resistant to change to change. That is not the ideal solution. It goes back to hire managers or have managers who understand that diversity is good on every metric that you can measure. So if you don't have those people in place, because it all starts at the top down, that's the problem. And the thing that I would just leave you with is what I started with, which is don't accept the narrative. Make sure that you own the story and be smart about it. If you want to get angry, you can get angry. But if you want to drive change and you have a goal, be smart and drive that change through what it is you're trying to accomplish. Money is a very powerful motivator, don't get me wrong, but really it's about making sure these companies understand that it's a place that employees want to work, for, that they get surveyed by Glassdoor or Stanford students, and they're not saying horrible things about you that all of us reporters then, love to write about, right? That's where all those anecdotes, they come from someplace. So it is about the culture as well. So own the narrative and make sure that you're not being fed someone else's narrative.
I would go back to something Bask touched on earlier, which is put yourself in the shoes of a group that you don't personally identify with. I think there's so much diversity beyond gender diversity. I know we're all here and thinking about women in technology, but join the African American group at your organization. Learn about what the challenges are for LGBT folks. There's just so many different backgrounds of people who are in the workforce, and just sticking to, I think, women and men is limiting to a certain extent. And so I think that you can empathize so much more and be more active in including folks if you can understand what people are coming to the table with.
Thank you.
Yeah, because this panel is about inclusion and action, I'm going to talk about something that I think we all experience, which is being in meetings. And there are things that you can do when you're in meetings. When the principle here is that good ideas can come from anywhere, right? And so if the goal of the meetings that you're in is about getting those good ideas out there, then pay attention to who's speaking and who's not, which is the more important one, right? If people are getting interrupted, whether that's a pattern or not, interrupt the interruption, right? Be the ally in the room for the person who's being interrupted. Or if you're the one who's being interrupted, look for the ally, right? And persist and don't give up on your good idea.
Yeah, I would just say don't assume management, leadership, and men, this, are as bright as you make it out to be, so you got to educate us. You got to educate us. So it's good to have top-down, what do you want to do, but a lot of us are just lucky to get where we got. So make sure that you do it in a high energy. So if you get confrontational, then there's a win-lose. A lot of energy into the meeting and have some passion and educate us, right? I think the best leaders we want to have are people who are going to learn, because they're going to be better leaders tomorrow. So I think what we will value is people who just want to learn. So make sure you take it upon, it's our responsibility to learn and do it as well, but don't assume that. Please educate us as well. Okay.
Thank you. So lunch follows, right? So thank you, panelists, first.
It's an honor to be up here with you.
Our aim was to spark conversations that you'll continue to have during lunch. So go network, connect to 3 people at least you don't know, and make sure that you advocate for people who might be outside of your existing networks. Be in your breakout rooms at 1 o'clock. There are some places you have to walk. They start promptly at 1 p.m. There's going to be music playing to signal lunch, and RT let me know that the VP Plus sessions meet outside the gym at 12:45 to be walked to your session. Have a great lunch, and we'll see you throughout the day. Thank you very much.
Thank you.